So, by way of an introduction, my name is Andy Leach. I'm one of the digital champions here at the Digital Culture Network. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping to kick things off. So, this webinar is due to last about 60 minutes. So, it's probably going to be 45 minutes of Q&A, myself and Tom. And then we're going to do a bit of audience Q&A. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask on this topic, please do so in the Q&A option, which should be at the bottom or at the top of your screens. By all means, use the chat to make comments. And if you're liking what you hear, you can give us a thumbs up using the emojis. There are captions being provided. They're live captioning courtesy of Amanda, who's in the background. Thank you, Amanda, for attending. The webinar is being recorded, I should point out, and it will be available on the Knowledge Hub on the Digital Culture Network website within the next week or so. So don't feel that you have to write copious notes and copy and paste links into a text document. All of this will be available to you in the next week or so, as I say. So looking at the time, it's about 2 minutes past 11. So hopefully I can see the numbers are creeping up as we go. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Digital Culture Network while we wait for these latecomers to arrive. So hopefully most of you will know the Digital Culture Network by now, given that you're on this webinar. For those of you, perhaps it's your first time, the Digital Culture Network was set up in 2019 on the back of some research that was done around digital skills within the arts and culture sector. It was found to be lacking in certain areas. So the Digital Culture Network was formed to try to address that issue. Our remit is to upskill and improve all the digital stuff that you produce as artists and practitioners in the arts and culture sector. We do that through various ways. We have one-to-one calls. We have workshops that we attend. We attend events up and down the country. And we also, on our website, have a knowledge hub, which is crammed with articles, case studies, webinars, lots of great stuff around all of our core specialisms. I'll touch on that very quickly. So my core specialism is websites and web design. My colleagues within the network cover things like social media, digital strategy, digital content, e-commerce, email marketing, search engine marketing, etc. So all the things that you need to tell your story and to promote your practice or your organization. We've got a running order today. Actually, before we go through the running order, I'm going to tell you about what you're going to learn. You're going to learn about why web and digital accessibility is really important, why it matters. You're going to understand how to judge if your website is eco-friendly or not with some really nifty tools, which are nice and simple to use. And you're also going to be covering how to make your website more sustainable and to reduce your digital carbon footprint going forward. So that's the main learnings, hopefully, from today. And that's what we're going to be working towards. In terms of the running order, in a moment, I'm going to be introducing Tom Greenwood from Whole Grain Digital, who is going to be doing the Q&A with me. We're going to talk about the carbon problem. We're going to talk about what is sustainable web design. What does that mean? We're going to talk about how eco-friendly is your website, because we can gauge how sustainable it is. We're going to talk about green hosting. What is that? We're going to talk about stuff like optimizing images and video. And then we've got a section on sustainability tips, which is going to be really, really useful, I'm sure, for most of you. And then to conclude, if you've got any questions for Tom, you can pop those into the Q&A. So I'm going to introduce Tom now. We're absolutely delighted to have Tom on board. If I was doing a webinar today on, say, the mechanics of popular songwriting in the 20th century, it would be the equivalent of having Brian Wilson or Paul McCartney. So I'm absolutely delighted to have Tom with us today. Tom, say hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Very well.
I'm not quite sure about, about the analogy there, but
well, you've done a lot of these kind of webinars and podcasts. Have you ever been introduced, kind of likened to a Beatle before?
I have not. Well,
there you go. There's a first. Digital Culture Network. So, Tom, to kick things off, because I'm conscious most people watching perhaps don't know you yet, could you give us a little brief potted history about your background and how you ended up being such a campaigner for sustainability in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've run a digital agency called Whole Grain Digital for 16 years. And it kind of spawned from my interest in both design and sustainability. Originally, I was in industrial design, really passionate about sustainable design of physical products, and then got excited about the opportunities of digital and how we could actually create like really useful things in the real world that didn't have the environmental impact of all of the physical things that we're making. And so I founded and ran Whole Grain Digital for many years, trying to work on projects with organizations doing something positive in the world, trying to run the business in a sustainable way. And for many years, thinking that the actual digital piece of what we're doing didn't have any environmental impact. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, when we started certifying as a B Corp and went through the process of kind of getting more rigorous about like how we actually quantify and reduce our impact, it became apparent that this was an oversight that we hadn't really looked at, and we started doing research internally at Whole Grain into the environmental impact of our own work in digital, and realized that it's quite significant. And that led us kind of on a journey to really championing this cause and trying to raise awareness within the digital industry more broadly that this is something that we need to talk about.
Okay, interesting. And just for the benefit of everyone, can you just explain very briefly what B Corp is? Sorry.
Yeah. So B Corp is an independent certification for any type of business that looks at your social and environmental impact and how you manage that in terms of your governance and it's a global thing. So it's the sort of the most rigorous independent certification for general like responsible running of a business.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to attempt to run a quick poll now. So this is going to be a quick poll for the audience. I'm going to launch this and hope this works. So this is around, have you taken steps yet to reduce your website's environmental impact? 3 answers, yes, no, or don't know. So I'm just going to let the audience take a moment to complete that. I can see that everyone's busily doing so. So broadly, in the yes camp, we've got about 19%. In the no camp, we've got about 60%. And in the don't know, we've got about 20%. So broadly 2/3 are in the no camp around having taken steps yet. So this is, in this sector, it's it's a big topic. So I think the visibility of this is increasing. Okay, so next question for you, Tom. We're going to talk in a moment about taking some simple steps for our audience to take to limit the carbon footprint of their own websites. But before we do, can you outline the broader picture around the expanding internet, the increase in kind of technology, and the power that's needed the energy that's needed to power it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a topic that's not really on that many people's radars. Partly, I think, because the impact of digital technology and the internet is sort of out of sight and out of mind. It's not like a car where you see fumes coming out of the exhaust pipe or and so on. But the internet, if you take it as a whole, is basically the largest machine that humans have ever created. It spans the entire planet. You've got hundreds of data centers. You've got telecoms networks that wrap the entire globe, as well as satellites in space. You've got billions of devices connected to the internet, and all of this is powered by electricity. And when you add it all up together, the amount of electricity to power the internet is roughly the same amount of electricity consumed by the whole of the United Kingdom every year. Wow. And we're one of the world's big economies. And then when you put that into carbon emissions to produce all of that electricity, it's up to about sort of 4%. Somewhere between 2 and 4% is the general academic estimates of this. And to put that in context, the aviation industry globally is about 2% of global carbon emissions. So the fact that the internet is somewhere between equal and double that in terms of its carbon emissions is quite shocking, because we all probably have it on our radar that aviation is an issue in terms of its carbon impact, but we probably don't have it really on our radars that the internet is actually equal or worse.
I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, I read your book, which was a great read, and really recommend it. And as I understand it, data centers are becoming more efficient in the way they process stuff, but exponentially the internet usage and kind of digital usage is kind of scaling up. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So, I think we're probably all familiar with electronic devices becoming more energy efficient over time. Our computers use less energy than they did, when we had desktops sort of back in the day.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're using more and more of them, and we're using, more and more streaming video and social media, and now, you've got kind of VR and AI is like using huge computational power and so on. So while the hardware, the networks, and the computers are getting more efficient, the actual what we're trying to do with them is sort of always exponentially increasing. So the amount of energy is not reducing.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, lots to think about. So I mean, you've written this book that I mentioned, and it's about sustainable web design. Can you just explain to us what is sustainable web design and why is it important?
Yeah. So sustainable web design is essentially approaching web design projects through the lens of trying to reduce the environmental impact, trying to understand and reduce the energy consumption, and in turn also the carbon emissions. So thinking about decisions we're making in design, in content, in development, and in hosting that are going to impact energy consumption, and trying to actually design that out. So we're designing out the waste of energy, and making things as efficient as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, next question. I'm guessing some of our audience may be unaware of how environmentally friendly their website is. So is there an easy way that they can assess the carbon footprint of their existing website?
Yeah, so there's a number of free tools online that can help you understand the environmental impact of your website. Websitecarbon.com was the first one, and we created that about 6 years ago. And you can put in the URL of any web page on the internet, and it will give you an estimate of the energy consumption and the carbon emissions of that web page. So that's something you can do for free, and it's a really good kind of educational tool to get started. There are other tools like ecograder.com, I think it is, which do a similar thing, but also give you some sort of more like granular information about some of the factors that impact that in terms of the design and technology behind it as well.
Okay, so that's actually really simple. So all you've got to do, and Nicola hopefully has put the links into the chat there. You can use either of these tools, jump online, pop your URL of your website in, and it'll give you an instant snapshot and a list of improvements, which is fantastic. Am I right in thinking, Tom, in both instances, it's the web page you're viewing rather than the whole website in its entirety?
Exactly. So they do it on a page by page basis. So, right. A lot of people would start by testing their homepage, but actually, if you really want to get into it, it's good to sort of test all of your main pages. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Really excellent tool. Brilliant. Okay, so let's chat a little bit about the organizations we support and what they can do to reduce their carbon footprint. In your book, you talk about green hosting, and that may not be familiar to everyone. So could you just give us an overview of what green hosting is, please?
Yeah, so we talked about data centers being one of the things that consumes a lot of electricity. And so every website is hosted somewhere in a data center, which is a big factory full of servers, and those that has to be powered by something. So at a simple level, green hosting generally refers to a hosting provider that has made a commitment to purchasing renewable energy to power that data center. There are some other things around it, once you get into green hosting beyond that commitment to renewable energy that they can do. So, obviously they might also have specific sort of energy efficiency commitments in terms of their cooling systems and the servers that they use and so on. Mm-hmm. And, you can get more granular into the sort of technical details, but at a top level, it's that core commitment to using renewable energy. And the Green Web Foundation, which is on the screen, their website's great for finding hosting providers that have made that commitment. They've got a database online of all of those providers, and you can also again, you can put your own website address in there and check it, and it will give you an answer as to whether your hosting provider has made that commitment and registered with the Green Web Foundation, provided evidence that they have a renewable energy supply.
Okay, thanks. And reading your book, am I right in thinking that there are kind of degrees of green hosting? So some are more green than others. Are you able to kind of maybe expand on that slightly?
Yeah. So, I mean, once you get into it, even the commitment to using renewable energy has degrees of greenness. Mm-hmm. So at the basic level, they might be buying renewable energy credits, which means that, you know, somebody who's producing renewable energy somewhere has sold the credits and they paid that money. But it doesn't mean that the actual electricity from the wind turbines or the solar farm or whatever it is in any way directly connected with the data center. At the higher level, what they might be doing is having a direct contract with a local wind farm, for example, that's like near to the data center, or actually, you know, buying and building their own, you know, solar installation on the data center or next to the data center. So there are these degrees of greenness, and, you know, some companies are more transparent than others. And I think, you know, the base level is just they've done something and they've bought renewable energy credits to cover all of their energy consumption. But in an ideal world, what you'd be looking for is for them to say, well, actually, we haven't just done the minimum, we've actually gone further and we've funded the construction of, you know, a wind farm near the data center, and we've got that direct supply would be the kind of the ideal outcome. Okay.
So if any organizations watching are committed to, you know, improving sustainability, if they go to this website, the Green Web Foundation, would you recommend kind of the UK-based hosting companies that are on there? Is that a good starting point for them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that would be a good starting point to check that out. I'd also say like a couple of hosting providers in the UK that I think are particularly good on this front are Crystal. Crystal Hosting. They have a real like deep passion for sustainability, and they do a range of hosting options for different types of websites. So that's worth looking at. And the other one is Positive Internet, who also they've actually got their own data center with their own wind turbine, and they're good for like more kind of bespoke hosting solutions for kind of like unusual kind of big projects.
Okay, so this webinar is being recorded and we're going to be sending out resources, etc. So I'll make sure that those are included in the resources that get published. Thanks for that. So at that point, we're going to have our second poll, because the first one seemed to go okay. So let's see if I can get this second poll up and running. The second poll is about this very topic of green hosting. So I've just launched that. So is your website green hosted? Yes, it is. No, it isn't. We're not sure. So let's just give that a moment. If you can hear drilling and banging in the background, my neighbours have decided this is the week to commence their loft conversion. So there's scaffolding, there's workmen, there's guys in high-vis jackets. So that's why I'm keeping muting myself, if you're wondering. Okay, so I can see here that we've got about 30% of people who are green hosted. So that's pretty good. We've got about 20% who are not. So there's a great takeaway for them right here. And there's about 50% who are not really sure. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag there.
So the ones who are not sure, I mean, just going to the Green Web Foundation website, or one of the tools we mentioned earlier, websitecarbon.com or EcoGrader. Those tools, if you just pop your web address in, they'll give you the answer to whether you're on green hosting or not.
Brilliant. Okay, just conscious of time, we shall push on. So a chunk of my time is spent auditing the websites of arts and cultural organizations who reach out to us. It always surprises me how website speed and performance suffers due to kind of basic housekeeping issues like not optimizing your images, etc. Can you tell us why optimizing imagery is important and provide a simple overview of how you go about doing that?
Yeah, so on a typical website, the thing that is going to consume the most data and in turn the most energy is the images. They're big files, and and often they're not well optimized. So often they're much bigger files than they really need to be. So there's a load of things you can do to optimize your images. The first thing is just making sure that they're sized correctly. So instead of uploading them directly from your camera at sort of 10 megapixels, actually uploading images that are closer to the size they're going to be displayed on the web, which is far smaller than what you'd have off a camera.
Yeah.
As well as checking that the file format is correct. So the example on the screen here is showing the same image in a PNG file is a much bigger file than it would be as a JPEG. JPEGs are much more efficient. And then there's stuff you can do in terms of actually like using compression tools to actually make the files even smaller, and strip out unnecessary data to get those file sizes down, and even convert them to other formats that you might not be familiar with, but which are web specific, such as WebP and AVIF files, which are, they're designed to be really efficient in web browsers. So so there's things you can do there. Some of those tools you can even add as plugins into your website. So if you're using WordPress, there's a tool called Short Pixel, which is a plugin which will do like the compression and file size shrinkage for you. There's another one called Optimal. And then there's some that you can use offline, just kind of on the web. TinyPNG is a nice thing. You can just go to tinypng.com and upload images and it will compress them for you. And
there's some links in the chat there to some of those tools that Tom just mentioned. So is WebP, is that very, very common now, or is it only supported by certain browsers? I mean, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so WebP is now supported by pretty much all browsers. I think it's like 96 or 97% of like browsers in use globally. So so it's pretty well adopted now. And then AVIF is less than that. I can't remember the exact number, but I mean, you can set up a website so that it will detect whether or not a user's browser is compatible and serve the most efficient file format. So it'll give them AVIF if they can handle AVIF, but it will give them the WebP if not.
Okay, fantastic. And for anybody watching, it's probably a good, if you're not sure about some of this, it's probably a good idea to have a word with your agency or your web developer or whoever looks after your website and just ask them for maybe a very quick training session so you can understand how to optimize your images and keep your file sizes nice and small.
Exactly.
There's an example here actually. So I mentioned I do web audits for clients, and this particular organization were saying, well, our website's very slow. It takes ages to download on a mobile, etc. Can you take a look into it? So we had a look behind the scenes, and indeed they're using these enormous background images, which look very beautiful, but they haven't really been optimized. So this example here, it's 7.2 megabytes. It's like 6,000 pixels wide, which is like 4 times wider than it needs to be. So yeah, a lot of it's down to housekeeping. You can make your website's performance much improved while also ticking the sustainability box as well. So that's something to think about. And it's not just images, Tom, is it? Do you want to touch on maybe video? Because in our sector, wow, we love video.
Yeah, so video, although I said that images are probably the main thing on most websites, but actually, like if you're using video, then video consumes far more data and energy than images do. So you really want to optimize that as far as possible. There's a few things you can do that will help with this. I mean, the first is trying to avoid autoplay videos if you can. I know there may be use cases where that's important, but if you can put a play button on it so that people only watch the video if they really want to watch the video, then that's going to save energy for all those people who didn't want to watch it. But it's also good in terms of loading times, particularly for people on mobile on slow connections, that if they're not having to load this video every time. Keeping, just the editing of the video, keeping it short, as concise as possible is really, makes a difference because it's less time is less data. And trying to use whatever software you're using to edit the video to compress those files down is really helpful. But then also using a platform that does that compression for you is the easiest way of doing it. So YouTube and Vimeo are good at like compressing your videos for you and streaming them efficiently with as little data as possible. So that's generally better than trying to host it yourself and serving the raw files. It's generally easier and more efficient to use one of these providers. And then also when you do embed them in a web page, sometimes these, YouTube player or the Vimeo player load a load of extra code that isn't really necessary unless someone's actually watching the video. And that slows your website down and it uses energy that's not needed. So there is a plugin for WordPress called Lazy Embed, which basically just strips out this code so that you can just embed your YouTube video or your Vimeo video without it having any negative impact in terms of performance or the environment. And then when somebody clicks play, only then does it load the extra code that's needed.
I see. So with it, I mean, you see the autoplay videos quite a lot, and they, they're very impressive, and they do create, a certain mood and an atmosphere. But if it's not selected for autoplay, i.e., it's user has to tap it to play it, I guess. Unless that happens, there's no energy being burnt. Is that right? It's just sitting in the background waiting to be played. Would that be correct?
It's largely correct. The only caveat is that the players themselves, like YouTube and Vimeo, the actual code for the video player gets loaded automatically by default, unless you use a plugin like Lazy Embed, which will stop that from happening. Okay,
cool. Right. Just conscious of time, so we're gonna push ahead. So other ways to reduce your website's carbon impact. So hopefully we're going to cover off. We're going to rattle through a number of kind of topics here, which are things that you can, if you've got the resources, you can implement yourselves. If you haven't, you can speak to your supplier to help you do this. So we're going to kick off with a number of takeaways, which hopefully will be of value to all of you. I'm going to start off with a bit of content management housekeeping. So most of you will be using a content management system to keep your website updated, so you can publish new case studies and new shows and new blogs, etc. And typically you'll have a media library within there. So the example on screen here is from WordPress, which is a very popular one. Quite often when I'm given access to look behind the scenes, I'll find that there are multiples of the same image, and they're not actually being used and published on the website, so they're totally redundant. So the problem there being, as Tom said earlier, those are still sitting in a data center somewhere when they needn't be. So one of the simplest things you can do is just block out an hour to go through your media library and to remove anything that's redundant. And that could be imagery. It could also be PDF files, Word documents, etc. If they're not required, don't keep them in your media library. Anything to add to that, Tom?
Just that's also kind of, like anything in good housekeeping, it makes your life easier as well, in terms of, if instead of 4 copies of the same image and they're all almost the same, it can get confusing over time to remember which is the correct one to use. So yeah, just sort of keeping things tidy as you go along generally makes your life easier, as well as being better for the environment.
Definitely. Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about color and screen energy? Because I mean, this is in the book, really fascinating.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things we found is that the different colors actually use different amounts of energy on modern screens. So it doesn't make so much difference on older LED screens, but a lot of modern devices are using what's called OLED screens. And what they have is instead of having one big backlight that kind of lights the whole screen, they have each individual pixel is an individual kind of tiny LED light bulb. So they light up individually. And what that means is that if you have a white background on your website, you're basically switching all of these tiny LED light bulbs on at full brightness to make the screen white. But if you've got a dark background or a black background, then they're either using very little energy or even switched off completely if they're pure black. So what this means is that dark colors actually use less energy on the end user's device. Bright colors, white in particular, use a lot more. And so this is an interesting thing to think about from a design perspective, is how can we create the ambience we want and present our brand in the way that we want, but also be mindful of just not defaulting to a white background and actually saying, well, how could we use a darker palette in key places and try to keep that energy consumption down?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, if sustainability is a key factor for an organization, perhaps this should be something that goes in the creative brief, because
Yeah.
the design agency may not be aware of this. So, before I joined the Arts Council, I was running my own digital agency, and I worked as a web designer for donkey's years, and it wasn't really on my radar at all. We knew about things like accessibility, etc., but sustainability for me is a fairly new topic, and I guess it is for a lot of people. And it's just an educational loop that designers need to go through. They obviously don't need to do dark designs for everything, but like you say, there's a compromise to be found. And I think didn't you go through the same process with your own website? Didn't you read it for similar reasons?
Yeah, exactly. So white is the most energy intensive color, and we found that blue is the second most energy intensive color. And our old website was basically white backgrounds with blue as like the accent color. So it was about as energy intensive as it could be. So yeah, a few years ago, when we learned that, we redesigned our website to use darker colors, less white backgrounds, less blue. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, my background is as a creative, so I just trained as a graphic designer. It's all about white space, affording white space in your designs and all the rest of it. And that still holds true, but there's other considerations now to be factored in for the modern digital designer. Yeah,
and I think what I keep trying to sort of reinforce with our team is to sort of rephrase white space as just space, because the space could be any color.
Beige space.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, sticking on the subject of color, am I right in thinking that the more colorful and vibrant an image is, the larger is its file size?
Yeah, to some extent. So essentially, like detail in an image is data that has to be stored in that file. So the more detailed an image is, it's color as well as like actual kind of detail within the photo or itself contributes to the file size. So the simpler an image is, and the less kind of color variation and so on, generally the smaller the file size. So that's something to think about from an art direction point of view. If you can simplify the palette, or you can use kind of simplified graphic styles that are kind of more like block colors or duotone, or black and white, that can keep your file sizes small. As well as, in terms of just generally reducing detail, things like shallow depth of field for photography, where the backgrounds are kind of blurred out, will also reduce file sizes.
Yeah. If I go back one slide, it's early in the presentation. I had a photo that I took of the Crucible of the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield. And the reduction in there was down partly because of the compression that's applied with changing it from a PNG to a JPEG.
Yeah.
Also, and it's very subtle, and most people wouldn't pick up on it. But and I took this lead from your book. You can just blur the edges of the image.
Yeah.
And that reduces the level of detail and proportionally reduces the size of the image, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So just blurring out things that aren't needed, a little bit of editing in Photoshop or whatever tool you use can really help bring the file sizes down, and sometimes even kind of improve things stylistically as well.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's stick on the topic of this wrestling between the designer and the sustainability person that I want to become. I mean, obviously, as a designer, we love to play with fonts. Typography is a passion, but that comes with some payload, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So fonts are things, they're files that have to be loaded onto the user's browser, and every time somebody visits the website, and that comes with an energy cost. It comes with a performance cost. So using them as efficiently as possible from a design perspective can really help from an environmental point of view. The most energy efficient fonts to use are what's called system fonts. So, and I know designers generally don't like system fonts, but system fonts are the ones that are already on people's devices. So you've got some fonts already on your phone and your laptop and so on. They vary depending on what operating system you use, but things like Times New Roman and Arial and Helvetica on Apple devices, Roboto on Android devices, these are what's called system fonts, and they don't have to be loaded, so there's no performance impact, there's no energy impact. They're basically free in that sense. So if you can use them, that's great. most people, designers, would want to use some sort of custom font, like the ones we've got on the screen, and that's fine. There's things you can do to reduce that. The first is just to use less individual weights. So you can see on here, you know, with Helvetica New, we've got sort of 8 or 9 different weights. If you wanted to use all of them in your design, you'd have to load all of those files onto the user's browser, and they could be, if they're not optimized, they could be like 250 to 300 kilobytes each. So that really adds up, and that's going to have a performance impact as well. So using like font weights and different typefaces mindfully is really important. But then you can also optimize. There are tools you can use to optimize the font files. So you can get tools online for free where you can convert them to WAF2, which is just a more efficient web file format, which will reduce the file size. And there's also tools called subsetting tools. You can just Google for font subsetting tools, and there's a load of free ones out there where you literally upload your font file, tell it what language your website is in. So for example, you know, if it's just in English, or if it's in English and French, you can just select those, and it will strip out all the characters that you're never going to use, because a lot of these font files have like 1,000 characters, but you know, English language has 26 characters plus numbers plus punctuation, which is about 100 characters. But so we're often loading characters that are never going to be used. So there's free tools online that will help you strip these down. So that's worth looking at.
That's very much a quick win, really.
Yeah.
For any of you, you know, speak to your developer or your agency and say, look, can we look at optimization of fonts, for example? Because that's okay. We're going to push on. Just conscious of time. We've got some questions as well, I can see. So we're going to talk a little bit about tracking scripts, Tom, aren't we? Can you give us a little bit of an overview on that?
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty common that people would have Google Analytics on their website to, you know, gather data about who's using their website and what they're doing. And then you may have other things added in there to do with your social media, or if there's any kind of personalization or advertising scripts that you've got in there. But these scripts can really use a lot of energy and impact performance and invade people's privacy by, you know, harvesting data that people don't necessarily want harvested. You've got to load the tracking script, then it uses energy on their device to gather their data, then it's using more energy to send that data back to the data center, and then that data all has to be stored basically for eternity. So the less you track and the more efficiently you track, the better it is for performance, the better it is for the environment, the better it is for privacy. And like I said, people tend to default to just sticking Google Analytics on their website because it's the industry standard. But there are alternatives for that standard tracking that have much smaller file sizes. So on the chart here, you can see Google Analytics is 17 kilobytes, and it uses cookies, which means you need a cookie banner and people to give permission to opt in. But there are some like really nice alternatives, like down at the bottom of the list, Fathom and Plausible are both only about 1 kilobyte for the tracking script. So really, really tiny. They don't use cookies because they're designed from a privacy first, anonymous perspective. But so they're really great tools, really efficient. They don't really impact performance much. And also, you know, if you, assuming you're not doing other things with cookies, you can actually, you know, in some cases, you could even get rid of the cookie banner, which is a big win from a user experience point of view. And
do they give the same, I mean, really interesting, Fathom and Plausible, do they give the same level of reporting that you get with kind of GA4, or are you making a compromise on the data you can capture? I guess you are, but...
Yeah, you are, but I guess the compromise depends on what you need. And that's why I think it's really important to start with understanding your own needs. For what data do you want, and why do you want it? And then find the tool that's right for you. Because in many cases, people are using like, you know, Google Analytics, and it has got a lot of powerful functionality, but most people aren't actually using that functionality or data. So there's a lot of websites where you could switch to Fathom or Plausible, and it gives you all the kind of standard data about your website, you know, which pages are people visiting, where are they coming from, and so on. And you wouldn't feel like you've lost anything. But if you are doing more advanced things with that data, then, you know, then fair enough, you may want a more advanced tool like Google Analytics. But it's best to start with understanding your own needs.
Really interesting. My colleague in the Digital Culture Network, James, who looks after data and insights, he did a webinar maybe 6 months ago now called "Why Are You Measuring That?" And it's just a challenge really to say, you know, we live in a world where, you know, data is everything, but you may be capturing a load of data without too much strategy or thought, and you're just gathering data for the sake of gathering data, and it's about trying to take a leaner approach, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And actually it simplifies your own life. If you only gather the data that you really want, then it just makes you can see the wood for the trees.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, excellent. So Fathom and Plausible, again, a great takeaway. That's something you could speak to your supplier about implementing on your website, or certainly getting their opinion on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to conclude this section with something a bit more technical, which is about code compression. So I would imagine most people watching this webinar aren't going to be able to do some of the points that we were about to touch on, but they can definitely ask their agency to do so, can't they?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is just to acknowledge that there is the similar things to what we've talked about with videos and fonts and images, in terms of the fact that you can compress them and make those files much smaller and more efficient. The same is true for all of the code on your website. And you might not do that yourself, but it's something you can ask, put in the brief for your web developers, to make sure that they are actually taking this seriously and they're making their code as small and efficient as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. I'm scribbling some notes down because, as I say, some of those resources we're going to put out and bundle up with this presentation within a week or so. So, yeah. Okay. So that's great. We've got another question here about, aside from doing your bit for the planet, what are the other benefits in taking a sustainable approach to our website and our other digital activity? I mean, we have touched on some of this already, but just for the benefit of everyone, can we just kind of maybe recap what those benefits are?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that you do to try and make your website more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly, is going to have positive knock-on effects for other things. Like, your website will load faster, and that's good for user experience. That's good for your search rankings, as well as it can benefit accessibility, because people who are on slow or expensive connections, particularly if you've got like people who are going to be visiting a lot on mobile, out and about, or people in developing countries where the data for them might be really expensive relative to local incomes, or slow, then these are benefits that are benefiting the humans that are using your services, not just the environment. And then also on the hosting side, if you make things more efficient, you might be able to have a smaller, cheaper hosting package, because if you're wasting server space and computational resources, then you'd have to keep upgrading your hosting and spending more and more money. So there's a sort of financial benefit there as well.
So it's a win-win in every area, isn't it?
It's a win-win in every area, yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Fantastic. I'm just going to conclude with some kind of key takeaways, really. So for everyone watching, a few things you can look at. You can look into your green hosting. You can use the tools that we've spoken about to see, firstly, if you are green hosted. If not, what are the implications of you moving to green hosting? You can audit your website to find out how sustainable it is, again, using the tools that we've shared. And that will highlight some areas for you to address, some quick wins, and obviously really worthwhile. Speak to your supplier about any improvements that those tools flag up, and make an effort, I think, to make your website as sustainable as it can be. Obviously, this is a topic close to our hearts at the Digital Culture Network. So if any of you want to get in touch with myself or any of my colleagues, we will do our best to help you with any questions you might have. And if we can't, we will point you in the direction of the people who can. So just looking at the time, about 11:45, so broadly on target. Thanks for all of that, Tom. We're going to have a Q&A now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we've got some questions in no particular order. I haven't actually looked at these, so let me just have a quick look. So one from Dawn. When tendering for a new website, what info should we include in the tender brief, and what info should we look for in the tender applications to know who is actively focusing on the sustainability and reducing carbon footprint, and who is just waffling? What a great question.
That is a great question. I mean, I think at a very basic level, just putting a line in the brief that says you want your website to be designed to be low carbon, I think is a good starting point, but you may want to get more specific in terms of, for example, benchmarking your current website and saying that you want it to be, you know, a certain amount better than that, you know, like 30% improvement or something like that, or benchmarking your competitors, if that's relevant to you, and basically saying you want to be the best in class, would be a good thing to put in the brief. And then how can you know that they're telling the truth and not waffling? I think part of it would be to test some of their other work on one of the tools that we talked about, Website Carbon or EcoGrader, for example, and see whether this is something they're already doing. You know, is their work in general efficient, as well as just talking to them and asking, you know, having a proper conversation with them to see whether they seem to have any depth of knowledge in this, in terms of talking through like the actual specifics of what they're going to do. Are they just saying, hey, we're going to give you a green website, or can they actually talk you through methodically how they're going to do that? And I think if they can, then, you know, that's a good sign.
And what you can do, Dawn, you can grill them on some of the topics we've covered in this webinar, and see if their eyes glaze over. A little bit of additional help there, Dawn. We do have a website template here at the Digital Culture Network for you to use, and there is a little sustainability section on that, which I'm keeping updated. So if you want to get in touch with me to request that, I can send that across to you. Right. Sinead, is there an easy and free way to find out which images are being used on your site to tidy up the assets in the CMS and remove duplicates? Our developers would charge for this, otherwise it's a lot of trial and error. Any tips? Oh,
that is a great question in terms of which ones in your CMS are actually being used on the website. There is a plugin for WordPress. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but I'm pretty confident there is a plugin for WordPress that basically identifies where each media asset is being used. It'll give you a list of the pages, so you'll be able to find out which ones basically are not attached, because in WordPress the database knows the relationship between the media and the pages where they're displayed. So yeah, I can't think of the actual name of the plugin, but I would say search around on the WordPress plugin repository if you're using WordPress, because that you can automate that.
And Sinead, I will find out from Tom after this webinar what exactly that plugin is, and I'll add it to the resources webinar, so that will be shared with you in due course. Great questions. Wow, we've got a good audience today, haven't we? Connie Young, you mentioned that a lot of sites have accessibility standards in mind when designing a site, like AA and AAA, etc. But is there an equivalent set of standards for sustainability? Wow,
that's a great question. The short answer is no, there isn't. There is a project though with W3C, which is the sort of the body that produces the WCAG accessibility guidelines. There is an ongoing project there which is going to release a set of guidelines very soon. Within the next couple of months will be their first set of guidelines, and they should be published on the website sustainablewebdesign.org, or at least there should be like a summary with a link to them when they're published. So I'd say that's something to watch.
That's a step in the right direction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. This one's a bit technical. Alex Gowan Webster, thank you for the question. Is the tag manager load that you mentioned a generic one? Does this vary depending on the number of tags, etc.?
Yes. So in that table where we had Google Tag Manager, that was just the generic adding Google Tag Manager. I think it was about 75 kilobytes. So that's quite a bit, but it's not including all the extra things you might inject into Google Tag Manager. So within Google Tag Manager, you might add various bits of code for like various social media platforms and tracking and so on. And it can kind of spiral it can grow as much as sort of infinitely. There's no limit to how far it can grow depending on how much you're injecting. Yeah. So be mindful of what you're adding into your Google Tag Manager account, as well as just the core tracking code itself.
Okay, fantastic. Brilliantly answered as well. I'm glad I didn't get asked that. Are Fathom and Plausible expensive? This is from Ellie at the Ely Museum.
No, they're not very expensive. They're not free like Google Analytics, but they're not very expensive. I think Plausible is about £6 a month or something for the kind of basic account. It does go up a bit depending on how much traffic you have and so on, but they're not, it's not big money.
Okay, fantastic. So worth investigating for sure.
Yeah.
Question from Mike Jones. If you did all of the suggested energy efficiency things on site design, are there any stats as to the actual level of energy saving, e.g. all white background versus black, dark blue background? Gosh.
Yeah. So
can you
so
measure, I guess, is the essence of that, isn't it?
So I mean, in theory, it's close to 100% on screen energy, not total energy.
Okay.
So the screen is probably 10% of the total energy of the website, but you could reduce that. You could reduce that down by like 90% by using a black background versus a white background. So that's quite a big, chunk off your overall energy consumption.
Yeah. Okay. Lucy Neal, in terms of sustainable percentage, what should be this industry standard? For example, our homepage is 67% greener than the websites tested, but what should we be aiming for? I know you're going to say 100%, aren't you, Tom?
Yeah. So if you're looking at Website Carbon, it tells you, it tells you sort of the percentage of websites that you're cleaner or dirtier than. So in an ideal world, you would be cleaner than 100% of other websites. It basically means you've got the most efficient website in the world. That's not very realistic for most websites, because the most efficient website in the world is probably a blank black page.
It's the Raspberry Pi one, isn't it, in your book?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you could easily, well, not easily, but I think it'd be realistic to try and get it to sort of 90%. What we're hoping to launch fairly soon, in collaboration with some other organizations in the industry, is a sort of an energy grading system like you have for appliances. So it's sort of A to F, like you have on fridges and TVs and things like that. So that would make it, I think, a bit more intuitive for a general audience as to like whether they're doing good or not. And I think and then you'll be able to say, okay, you'll be able to put it in your brief to your creative agency and say, we want an A grade an A grade website from a.
So is that a bit like the Carbon Calculate? You put in the URL and it pulls back kind of an A to F kind of grade. Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, it'll be exactly that. So it'll be this, when it's ready, it'll be added to tools like Website Carbon and EcoGrader.
I see.
And it'll be standardized across tools. So we're collaborating with other people to standardize that, so that you'll be able to put it in your brief and say, we want an A grade or a B grade or whatever it is. And you can see where you are now. You could say, okay, our website's currently a D. We want it to be a B.
Okay. I mean, Lucy, don't be just downhearted. I think, having run lots of audits for lots of organizations in the past year, if you're 67% greener, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
But, as Tom says, with some of the takeaways from this Q&A session, hopefully be able to improve that even more. I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to rattle through a few more before we conclude. Should we consider tidying up other image databases online, for example, MailChimp? Apologies, not website related, but it occurred to me we have a lot of historical images in places like MailChimp and Canva. Well, I mean, we're talking about website sustainability, but that's part of a larger digital sustainability kind of campaign, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like all of the principles we talked about today apply across the board, really, in terms of your digital media and emails. Emails are no different.
Sure. So any digital footprint, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the same for emails is also cleaning up the list of subscribers. If you've got people who never open those emails, then cleaning those out will be good in the sense that you're not then sending hundreds or thousands of emails that never get opened but consume energy.
Sure. That came from Claire. Claire, thanks for your question. Laura Henright, is good sustainable web design also good accessible design? I think we've covered that, but do you want to quickly just summarize?
Yeah, I'd say broadly yes. So everything that you do to make things more efficient will make things more accessible from a performance point of view, in terms of easier to access on low-powered devices, slow, patchy connections, those sorts of things. It won't necessarily make things more accessible in terms of wider like accessibility standards and helping people with various disabilities and so on. But generally, like a website that is designed to be really good from an accessibility point of view will probably have quite a high level of diligence in the coding, and that ties in nicely with the sustainability approach of just really high quality, efficient code that's easy to read and so on. So those two things are very much aligned.
Okay, thanks for that. Really good question here. And this is a hot topic for me because I'm actually working on a case for an organization who do use Squarespace. So given that someone else has mentioned it, I'll read it out. What are your thoughts on Squarespace? We're currently using WordPress, but I find it awful and clunky with too many plugins, etc. But love the ease and visual aesthetic of Squarespace. What are your thoughts on this? Now, let's limit this just down to this topic of sustainability, because I think, I mean, I've Googled this as recently as yesterday. What is your view on Squarespace? Because a lot of organizations love it.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I think firstly, Squarespace is very good at what it does. And credit where it's due, there's a good reason that people are using it. Squarespace has, I'd say, I guess it's sort of mixed in the sense that it's not the most efficient platform, but I think they've done a lot of work over the last few years to try and improve the efficiency of it. And the good thing about a platform like Squarespace is if they make one change to make it more efficient, your website automatically benefits from that, and every single person using Squarespace automatically benefits from that. So yeah, I think although it's not necessarily top of the game, it's not too bad, and okay, hopefully over time it will keep getting better. So
it's moving in the right direction. I mean, yeah, to put you on the spot, is it green hosting?
This is a good question.
I don't think it's clear cut. And I'm sorry. I mean, I did run some tests and it wasn't coming up as green hosting. I mean, but who do you believe?
Yeah, I think in the past they didn't have any specific commitment, but I think they do now. Just off the top of my head, yeah, it's possible that sometimes these things, that if you'd run a test, for example, through the Green Web Foundation, there are sometimes cases where things are green hosted, but they don't get picked up because of things like firewalls and so on, that the test can't detect the actual source data center. So I think that Squarespace does now have that commitment.
Okay, fantastic. So last question, because we need to wrap up. This is a good one. It's from Amy Lewis. Where is wholegraindigital.com hosted? Smiley face.
Yeah, that's a good question. Wholegrain Digital is actually, well, it's on Kinsta, but Kinsta is in a Google Cloud Platform data center. So, pros and cons to that in the sense that Google is sort of pretty ahead of the game in terms of energy efficiency and its commitment to renewable energy. But at the same time, and Kinsta itself adds a lot of like energy efficiency kind of technology on top of that, specifically for WordPress. On the other hand, there's other considerations around the dominance of Google and privacy and so on that need to be thought about. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Crystal hosting, as I mentioned earlier, and I hope that we'll move our website to Crystal in the future, would be my hope. But we will ensure that Crystal is on the resources pack that we're going to send out. Yeah. We're going to wrap up there, I think. Tom, I just want to say a big thank you to you for sparing the time. It's been fantastic to learn more about what is increasingly important topic in our sector. So yeah, big applaud to you. There's some clap emojis. Fantastic. I'd also like to thank Amanda for doing the live captioning, and my buddy in the background, Nicola. Thanks to you. Just very quickly before you guys sign off, we've got some upcoming webinars I just want to flag up. On July the 12th, James is doing how to enhance Google Analytics 4 data with Google Tag Manager, which is going to be great. And my buddy today, Nicola, is doing getting started with TikTok on July the 19th. That's going to be an absolute belter, I've no doubt about it. And just to finish, if you want to find out more about the Digital Culture Network, please visit our website. If you've got any challenges for anything digitally related, get in touch with us. Fill out the form, get in touch, and you can also follow us on Twitter. So that's about midday. That just leaves me to conclude. So thanks everybody for today's webinar, and we'll see you all soon. Tom, thanks again. Okay, see you then.